Hey everyone, it's Brian here and welcome to the Mental Musician Podcast. It's a podcast all about building mental health awareness in the music industry, where we share stories and have open conversations with fellow musicians and artists, so that way we can break the stigma and hopefully work towards building a future where musicians can pursue their dreams without sacrificing their mental health. It is episode 3 today, and I'm so happy to have my friend from the UK, bass guitarist and wonderful teacher Michael Wright back on the show. He was my very first guest on the show, and that was in the very first episode as well. First and foremost, for today's episode, Michael and we will be diving into conversations about our suicidal ideation, his experiences with suicidal thoughts. So if that is something that you're not comfortable with listening to at the moment, that's okay. I hope you can come back another day. So today's episode does get quite heavy and emotional. As I mentioned earlier, we do talk about our suicidal ideation and experiences with suicidal thoughts. But at the same time, as we did in the first episode, we try to make a few jokes. We try to keep it light and laugh at each other, because all in all, we want to give you some hope. We want to tell you all that even though we've had some of these moments and we've had some seriously dark times, we have still found a way to live and keep on going. So just one more thing before we get into the episode. Around the 1 hour and 14 minute mark of the episode, you may notice that the audio quality on my side changes. That's because I knocked the cable out on my microphone. So hopefully it doesn't take away from the conversation and the depth and the emotion that we have. But, you know, if you're listening to in the car with your headphones and you notice a bit of a change, just wanted to give you a heads up there. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Michael today. I hope you get something out of it that helps you in your own journey. And if you do, please share it with your friends, family, fellow musicians, because the more people who listen to this podcast, the more mental health awareness we can build in the music industry, and the more artists and musicians we can help around the world. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode, my conversation with Michael Wright. Thanks so much, Michael, for doing this again. And you are the first episode of my podcast, this podcast, and we got a good reception, I think. A whopping 50 streams, I think 2 downloads, and 1 or 2 subscribers. If anyone who hasn't listened, please go back and listen to it. It's up now on all your favorite Spotify streaming platforms. That makes no sense. Spotify streaming platforms.
You're implying that Spotify own all the streaming platforms, so therefore when you go on a streaming platform, it is by proxy Spotify. Is that right?
Yeah, fuck Apple and YouTube Music and radio.
Certainly that FM and that AM.
I heart radio. How's the BBC going?
I haven't checked in a couple of months. Still there.
No, so I'm really grateful that you're back here again, and today we are going to go a little bit deeper and darker, as I promised we would. Not just because I promised, I do keep my promises, but also this is something that Michael and I feel very strongly about, building mental health awareness, not just for musicians and young artists, anyone in the creative performing arts, but just people in general, young men especially. And one of the things that a lot of young men struggle with is opening up, reaching out, talking about their struggles, especially if they're struggling with depression or suicidal thoughts. I'm not sure exactly what the stats are. I'd imagine it'd be very, very similar in the UK as it is in Australia. But it's interesting how in Australia, more women are likely to be diagnosed with depression. So 1 in 5 Australians, so let's just say that's a couple million Australians, will be diagnosed with depression at some stage. But men are more likely to die by suicide. So women are more likely to seek help, whereas men are more likely to take their life and die by suicide. I'm not sure what the exact stats are, but I'd imagine that is quite similar in the UK, Michael.
Yeah, it's. I was just looking at some stats from a charity I have affiliation with, Man Down UK. I used to run one of the local facility meetings here, so basically support group for men in my local area. And there were stats that they put up about the suicide rate. It is, you know, it's. I mean, I think any suicide is extortionately high, but the numbers kind of go into those high no, triple digits in terms of what men taking their lives every year. When you mention that stat in terms of Australian mental health, yeah, I think it's no surprise that um, women would likely go out and seek help to say there's something wrong, whereas traditionally men wouldn't. But then they would have higher rates of suicide because they haven't sought for help, or they haven't, for whatever reason, haven't decided that they just need to be open about it and get support. So they'll just hunker down um, and think they can tough it out. And even the charity Man Down, even the term of it, when you man up, man down, like that term is, you suck it up. If you're going through tough times, you just suck it up and you get through it. But yeah, it's the statistics are damning. But I always say to people who don't have experience with mental health, it's, yes, the statistics are damning, but for people in the mire, people who live with mental health conditions, it's almost like you can normalize it and go, well, yeah, of course, or you can rationalize it. Whereas anyone who doesn't have that experience might look at it and go, well, how can you rationalize something like that? And I think that leads on to our conversation today, where we're talking about suicide. Is the same thing. People are probably going to be listening to this and go, well, how can Brian and Michael rationalize, and how can they talk about it like they're talking about their favorite guitars? It's something that if you don't have the lived in experience, and if you don't have that experience with it, it's really difficult to justify to people why one can be so, not flippant, but one can compartmentalize suicide, and almost talk about it in the third term, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely, Michael. And you make I like how you said we're trying to make it normal. And anytime you talk about suicide or any death, it's not a happy topic. That's the first thing I want to say. There's having conversations like this isn't to sensationalize it or to glorify it, to bastardize it, or to make it this, dare I say it, romantic thing where we're not. As far as like in my own personal experience, when I talk about my depression, for me it's a little bit easier for me to talk about it now, and I've been talking about it for 12 to 18 months online, podcasts like this, and writing about it. Even though I find it easier to talk about it now, I still don't enjoy talking about it. I wish I didn't have to. I mean, I would be out of a job. So maybe I should keep talking about it. um, and I guess that's why I try to make some jokes about it, because that's, I guess, my way of normalizing it to make it comfortable, as comfortable as it can be,
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do, at least what Michael you do with all your students and your charity work as well, is to just open up the conversation and give people a chance to share their stories, as generic and cliche as that sounds. And the first step to reaching out and seeking help is to talk about it. If you don't talk about something and get it out in the open, then it stays repressed. And
Mm.
I know from personal experience and mates of mine, the more you keep it in, the more you invalidate your feelings, and the more you hate yourself and you loathe yourself and you question why you're thinking these things. And you know, I don't know if I feel like I need to explain why I'm saying die by suicide, not commit suicide, but more people die by suicide than other diseases. Now we're not here to discredit any other diseases or illnesses. All illnesses, diseases are horrible. But there's something about someone who's, especially young people, who believe that the only way out is to take their life. There's something that just, I mean, we're all going to die at some point. Yeah, let's get that right. That's why I'm wearing black.
Really?
So
Oh no, you're kidding me. Get out. Really?
that's what we we're going to break into, a little bit of lightness every now and then. And that's what we want to do because, if you have these feelings, then there's a host of reasons why it may trigger it. For me, when I first started having suicidal thoughts, when I heard mates of mine talk about their suicidal ideation, some who attempted their lives, that's when it would give me a little bit of incentive to say to myself, this mate of mine or this person I know went through this, but they're still here and they're still trying their best. So when you talk about it and someone listens to you, it gives them evidence that a real person who's lived through this experience has found a way to get through. Doesn't mean that they've overcome it or they're cured from it, but it just means that they're still fighting on. And that's what we're trying to do. We're not experts academically. We're not going to just list all the stats and then give you all the research. Michael, you're here to share your story and what you went through, how you found a way to get through, or if you just got through it, even if you're not sure how you found a way. And hopefully anyone listening, if you're struggling or if you know someone who's struggling, after you listen to this, I hope that you feel like there is a way to at least live on to the rest of today and tomorrow. So any thoughts, Michael, before I start peppering you with questions and getting you to cry?
Well, when you put it like that, Brian, any thoughts? No, I think you've expressed it eloquently. And if but actually, I'm just going to backtrack. So I'm glad you mentioned die by suicide because there'll be people who will be listening to this will go, well, hang on a minute, that's an odd turn of phrase. Surely it's commit suicide. And it's like, well, the origins of it was when the term committing suicide referred to it as a crime. In the UK, at least, not long ago, it was a criminal offence to commit suicide. So the term commit is part of breaking the law. And it would have had all these connotations of people being sectioned, regardless of their mental health or their fragile state. They just would have been essentially locked up in an asylum and treated as insane. And that was the way that the UK dealt with it. So the term committed suicide is essentially means it's an illegal act when it's not. It's a horrible act, but it's not illegal. So die by suicide or anything in those terms are a lot more accurate because it depicts how people leave this earth. When you say commit, it just has all these horrible connotations. And luckily enough, certainly in the UK, that we don't really use that phrase anymore. Not that if someone was to tell me that and I'm in conversation, not that I will be offended, but I'm like you, I'll just refer to it as that one. So I just kind of wanted to clarify that with a couple of listeners here who may be thinking you're saying die by suicide. But please, if you mention commit suicide, don't worry. Me and Brian are not going to knock on your door and say, oi, we're going to have a chat with you, with a couple of baseball bats. You shouldn't have said that. Right, we're not going to do that. Well, we might. No, we're not going to do that. We're not going to find your IP address and find out where you are. We're definitely not going to do that.
Well, you might not, Mike, but no, I'm glad the language is changing. I guess that's the evolving nature of mental health, mental illness language. I have also seen posts and researchers, doctors try to dispel the difference between mental illness and mental health. That's probably another conversation for another day. But as I'm certain that you feel this way, Mike, as well. But I don't know anyone who ever wants to commit suicide the same way they commit to marrying their wife. I mean, you could say marriage is like death, but I'm not married. And actually, my girlfriend, she's my number one support, and she does listen to every video and podcast. But yeah, like the other term, there's the other term, someone took their own life. And I know that these terms have been around for decades, and it's only really been the last 10, 15, maybe maximum 20 years where the language has changed. So, hopefully, this is something that continue to change, and that's all we can try to do. So, as much as we both wish we had $1 million or $1 billion to put legislations and programs in schools and clinics, all we can do is just talk about it and be as honest as possible. And what I'll try to do with Michael is we'll try to relate it back to our music careers, and I guess maybe the battle or the dichotomy between trying to be a musician, a professional musician, where it's quite ironic where when you write a song, when you perform a song, your artists are expected to be so vulnerable and to express themselves. But get off the stage and you just have to dedicate yourself to the art and craft, and you forget about being a person. A lot of artists over centuries, or decades, centuries, clearly, I guess if you read biographies or stories of the great artists of the 20th century or before, it's very clear that a lot of them were struggling, and yet they talk about their art and music as if the music was their savior. And I think this might be blasphemous to say as a musician, but I do think that if artists and musicians focus on their health first and put the music second, they might actually have long and successful careers and be healthy as they do it. And so, Michael, come on down. Welcome to Millionaire Hot Seat. Who wants to be a millionaire?
First question for $100.
Take that. That's all the joking part, ladies and gentlemen. So, all right. Anyway, so now I know that we've gotten to know each other, Michael, over the last few months, half year. I know that your mental health struggles, you've only really started to understand it in the last, say, 5 years or so, maybe 10. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I guess if you reflect on things growing up and starting a music career, or even before a music career, when did you start noticing that things weren't quite right mentally for you, whether it was symptoms of depression, or if you're okay with sharing about your eating disorder? But I guess in general, when was the first time, if you can remember, that you started noticing things didn't feel right?
Well, it actually started with the eating disorder when I was 15. So family moved from the southeast of England, so a county called Essex, which is basically neighbouring London. Grew up in Essex, and at the age of 15, I'm in the middle of preparing for my school exams. My dad decided to move us from Essex to a very rural part of Lincolnshire, which is in the East Midlands of the country. So we've gone from a kind of suburban environment where London is only 45 minutes away on the train, and you've got the local beach, which is, again, like 15 minutes away. So everything's close. Got all of my friends, all my community, my family, everything's there. To then be moved to a completely alien place in the middle of, literally in the middle of nowhere, starting a new school, starting classes which I weren't familiar with. So I had to pick classes which I had to start, halfway through, which I didn't study in my previous school. So there was a lot of upheaval, and I didn't want to leave my hometown. So when we moved, there was a lot of reticence, and there was a lot of anger, and just it wasn't a nice period of that time. I can only put it down to my mind and body basically dealing with all this stuff, the turmoil and the trauma, essentially boiling it down into an outlet. And that outlet, in terms of mental illness, was an eating disorder. So I developed my first eating disorder when I was 15. And so I would say that was when I was at least aware that things aren't right. In terms of the symptoms of depression, that started when I think I was 18 or 19, and I was living in London at the time with my band that I was in. So we rented a house just outside of London, and I found myself spending a lot of time. I had a lot of time to myself, and my bandmates weren't. A couple of them weren't necessarily like me, who are very keen and eager to explore the city and get to know everything. And whereas I just went in and just had that way where I wanted to know everything about London and go and see all of the famous sites. And as a musician, also pay pilgrimage to a couple of the famous venues and streets and places. So I found myself becoming a lot more isolated and doing a lot of things by myself. And I remember a particular moment when I felt this profound sense of loneliness when I was, it was back in my room, and I just bought Mingus and I was listening to the album, and I got still one of my favorite albums, and I was just listening attentively, and I think Goodbye Pork Pie Hat came on, and as I was listening, I just had this sensation that you're on your own. There is no one there. This is all on you. You're on your own, and there's no one there to help you. And it was quite a profound feeling, because it almost paralyzed me with the sense that, gosh, maybe he's right. Maybe I am on my own. I've got no support network. I've got no friends. I feel alone. I feel isolated. I don't feel understood. So that was so I would say that was probably the first instance of feeling depressed. But certainly for my mental illness issues, I would say started when I was 15 with the first of many eating disorders.
Oh man, I guess were you able to talk to anyone, or did your family knew? I wish that you had. I guess I wish you had the support that you have now back then. But yeah, were you able to share?
No, because at that time, well, certainly when I had my eating disorder, it was a very rare thing for a young boy to have an eating disorder. So my school didn't know what to do with it. In fact, I don't think they even understood. They, in many ways, enabled it, because I remember having a PE teacher who used to see me. I used to bunk off lessons during my last year in high school. And I would go and work out in the gym. Normally, there are two options. Number one, I'd go in and register with my form, and then I will walk out the school gates and basically not go back to school until I had music. When I had music, I would go back in and I would be there. But the rest of the subjects, I'd literally just not be there. I was absolutely obsessed with exercise, and I was, spending all my school time, all my time at school in the gym. And I just remember one of my PE teachers kind of commenting me on my resilience, and because at that point I had lost a lot of weight, but she saw that as a commitment to health, and like, oh, you're getting into shape, and look at that, you're doing this. And it's like, well, hang on a minute, you're a professional, you work for Team GB. Can you not spot that a student's appearance has drastically changed in 3 months? So I was basically the support networks at that time in the schooling. I have to say, a lot's changed now in school. If that wouldn't happen in schooling in the UK, there would be no way a student would be let to have their eating disorder get that far. No way. But back then, there were very, very different times, and the methods and the ways of how you treat that were different. So to answer your question, no, I didn't have any support. I didn't confide, certainly with an eating disorder, because I was a young kid and I didn't really know. Didn't have anyone to confide to when I talk about that moment when I was 18. Again, there was no one to confide in, because I didn't really know what it was. I didn't really have anyone checking in on me. My bandmates were, we were young lads, so the emotional intelligence to kind of come in and say, hey buddy, you're all right, I've noticed something, that it wasn't there, because they were preoccupied about their own thing and making sure that we're playing at this venue and I got to do this one, or the guitarist, like, I want to make sure I play this solo. Like, basically we're all in our own worlds. I'm pretty certain that the initial experience that we have of anything plays the role of how we experience it furthermore. So if you have a bad experience with um, a job or a career or a person or something like that. In this case, my mental illness, if we have a bad experience in terms of not getting the support, not getting the help, kind of almost being left to it, then I think it plays a role in how one thinks about their mental illness, um, and more importantly, how one thinks about how others will help them. And I think that it's only right that the mind kind of comes up with its own strategies and comes up with its own narratives to say, do you remember that time that happened? Well, that happened before and this didn't happen. So, don't expect this situation to be any different because you remember what happened last time. So those formative experiences, really, really did cut deep. And I think it plays a part in um, my own feelings towards support, and perhaps a negative and a little bit more of a cynical view that no one will really help, because that was formed from a young age when at the time I had no one to help me.
It's amazing how, as I've gotten to know you, our lives, there's so many similarities where, if I can share, throughout high school, say between the ages of 14 to 17, that was year 9 to 12 for me. That's when
Yeah.
I started having I guess, the trauma and the bad experiences that may have triggered, or probably triggered, the start of my depression and anxiety. I missed a lot of days of school, and I really only turned up if I had a music class, or I would go straight to the music room. It was either music or nothing. And I
Yeah.
mean, I knew what I was doing in the sense that, well, I don't want to be around people because I don't think anyone is going to understand. And this was a different time. I know for you it was early 2000s. For me, this was late 2000s, early
Yeah.
2010s. So it's amazing how now kids are more likely to open up and say if something's wrong. But yeah, I just remember that, anytime I'd turn up to school after 3 or 4 days of missing school, purely because I was exhausted. There was a lot going on at home with my family. My
Mm.
mum has been sick all my life. My dad, I didn't know this at the time, but he was in the process of shutting down half his business because he was essentially the only provider of the family.
Mm.
So, a lot of pressure was put on me, and I became the man of the house. My brother, he's 4 years younger, so he gets away with everything. Uh, no, no grudges there. But at the time, being a teenager, you're wondering why me. I just want to get on with school, and I started isolating myself from my mates and people who I thought were really close friends. In high school, you have 15 best friends. I was very popular. I had two, and anytime I tried to open up with some of them and say, hey, can we go catch up for coffee? Firstly, they'd look at me and go, the fuck, why are you having coffee? Ew, why can't we have an iced mocha, or chocolate? So I think that was my first mistake, asking them to have a coffee.
That is
um,
very adult of you. It's like, yeah, do you want a cortado? You want to, like, I'm really, really fancy a vanilla latte. Do you want one? Yeah, I can.
they wanted froyo, and but they would tell, no, I want to focus on my studies, and stuff is a little bit too heavy for me. And I had some good friends. They didn't know what was going on with me, but they'd say, "Oh, you finally turned up to school, you drop kick," and they'd say, "Oh, why aren't you participating in the athletics carnival? All these things." And there was a
Yeah.
big part of me that wanted to tell them what was going on. But I guess society at the time was very different, and um, I was very lucky enough to have one of my teachers who pulled me aside one day, and he noticed that I had missed something like 23 days of school. Nowadays, if I missed 23 years of school this year, I wouldn't finish year 12. But thankfully, he and the head teacher, they managed to change it around. So I missed 12 partial days and 13. I missed 12 partial days and 13 full days. So I just scraped over the quota. And he pulled me aside. He told me a story about how one of his students from years ago, she was a top dog or top cat, and she was just killing it. She was on her way to valedictorians and scholarships, And then her dad died the day before the first final exams, our year 12 exams, and she was broken, and she essentially failed her final exam. She didn't quite get into the courses that she wanted, but he encouraged her to take 3 or 4 years off, just go travel, have fun. I think he mentioned that she did eventually get into the career path that she wanted to. He was the one teacher that noticed that something was going on. He didn't pry. He just said, look, I read a letter from the deputy principal. Every other teacher just went, well, as long as you try to turn up. And it's not their fault. Teachers they have a tough job already to try to deal with 30 students or 30 students in a class. But he was the one teacher who genuinely cared. And I guess if I had more of those teachers, I don't know, life could have been a bit different after that. Maybe for you too, Michael. Just like you, I remember after high school, I isolated myself a lot and I traveled a bit. I didn't go straight to uni. And, you mentioned Goodbye Pork Pie Hat. That was, I think, the first jazz song that I learnt on guitar. I guess if I can go back to your eating disorder, how did you get through that? Or was there a certain point where it ended? Or did it just kind of fizzle out as you got older?
I mean, I had an eating disorder, I'd say, for 15 years. I started to have a better relationship with food around about 32. But from the majority of my mid-teens to all throughout my 20s and 30s, it was always there. Like with anything, a little bit like with mental illness, comes and goes. There are some moments when it's very intense, and then there are some moments where it's just in the background, and there are some moments where you think, oh, I think I'm all right now because I'm not binging or purging or overeating, and then all of a sudden something happens and then you're there again. There were some moments in my life where, certainly when I started teaching or when I started working a little bit more as a musician, so I had steady work and I had the opportunity to go into teaching, and kind of life was going pretty good, but I still have an eating disorder. So in my mind, I could kind of justify it because things were going well. But I would say the turning point was when I joined a men's eating disorder peer group. It was called at the time Men Get Eating Disorders Too, and then they changed it to Male Voice with an ED at the end, representing eating disorders. So it was a support group that was run, I think every Monday or Tuesday in somewhere along Edgware Road in London. And I've been searching for help, and then all of a sudden it came up. It's like, here's a group for men who have eating disorders. I'm like, oh, brilliant! There's more of me. Fantastic. So that was a big turning point, because I was able to talk to all my peers in the group who had their own experiences, and there was a comfort in a way knowing that, it's not just me. I'm not the weird one. At the time I thought I was very unique in terms of having an eating disorder. I'd never met any other blokes who had eating disorders. So going there, and also with the help of Dr. Will Devlin, who I have to give a massive shout out, who run the group. He was phenomenal, and he did a lot of work with me and the others to get me to reframe my relationship with food. And from that peer group, I started to get better, and I started to develop a healthier relationship with food. And I would say around about the age of 32, certainly when I started one of my teaching jobs, where I could go a day, a week, and not be consumed about thoughts about food, about what I ate, what I didn't eat, etc., etc. And it felt like I could leave the dinner table and just almost go, well, this is how normal people feel, like when they're full up, or they've had a bit too much, or they're a little bit hungry. This is how they feel. They can just go about their day and not be consumed by all of this. And that was a lovely moment. And I, as I mentioned to the Man Down support group that I was running, I said there's almost like it was a tick. So I could almost go in and say, right, I've conquered that, because I never thought I would conquer my eating disorder, because I met people in their 70s who were still dealing with an eating disorder, and I just thought this is this is a thing that I'm going to have to live with for the rest of my life. I need to manage it. But I never thought I'd get to the position where I would be not even thinking about it, and having a normal relationship with food. So that was a lovely moment, and something I can look back and go, well, I fixed that. And apparently everyone says that's quite hard to fix, but I somehow managed to do it. So yeah.
Would that have been the first time in your life where you met not just men with eating disorders, but a group of men who are willing to open up and just spill their guts and be
Yeah.
vulnerable?
Yeah, actually, good question. Yeah, I guess it was actually. I guess it was because all of the groups I had looked at were either female, or there weren't really any mixed groups. It was all based upon, support groups for females, for women. Um, I never came across anything for men. So you're quite right. At that time, I could stare across and have people talk to me and go, well, you're a bloke and you have similar issues to me. And they're probably looking at me going, well, you're a bloke and you have similar issues to me. And although our stories were different, we had a commonality in our relationship with food, and we're all in different, and we're all at different stages of our eating disorder. Some people like me were seeking recovery and seeking an answer. Some people were absolutely in the mire and were talking about it, but you just sense that they weren't ready to get out and they didn't want to get out of it. Yeah, that was really significant that, there were blokes who were talking about it, and I would say almost ties in with the changing society when it became okay for men to talk about.
That goes back to what we were saying at the start of recording, where when you see someone who has maybe not the exact same struggles and experiences, yeah, but very similar, and
Mm,
they've found a way to get through, or even if they're just sharing it openly, that gives you so much comfort to know that you're not alone, and to know that, okay, you might be struggling, but you're struggling with someone. And with anything that you do in life, if you're doing it with someone or you're sharing that journey with someone, it just makes it a little bit easier or a little bit more
mm,
comforting. If like, well, I remember when we first connected, this was August last year, 2025, and I just shut down my music school, and I still was teaching a little bit. I might teach a little bit this year, but it was at a point where I'm done with teaching, and a big part of it was because maybe I was just cooked and burnt out, but also because I had ignored a lot of my struggles over the best part of 10 years. I had two seizures and a complete breakdown at the end of 2024. And I did know people who had depression or breakdown seizures as well, but I didn't know anyone in my space, the music education space. I know a lot of teachers, primary school teachers, high school teachers are struggling, but I just don't know them personally. You might see
mm.
it on YouTube or the news and you relate to it in a sense, but to me, unless if I know them personally, it's still hard to relate to. So
Yeah,
since talking to you, that's reassured me that I made the right choice, at least for me at the time, and knowing that, okay, I'm not fucked in the head for deciding to stop teaching, or I'm losing my passion, or at the time I'm losing my passion for it. I'm going to step away from it. And,
yeah,
you know, before meeting you, I toiled and just toyed with the idea of just toughing it out, doing the man thing, just rub your elbows with grease, have a teaspoon of cement, get on with it. And that just, anytime I thought about doing that, it just reminded me of the stress and the pain that I put myself over years. Where, you talked about exercising. Well, for most of 2024, as I love sport, I love cricket and I love running, but I over exercised a lot in 2024 because I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping, so I wasn't recovering at all.
mm,
And I would come home at 10 o'clock at night, and if that day I felt was a shit day, I would force myself to run 10 kilometers or for an hour to say that I still can do something worthy, or I still
mm,
am tough or resilient. And if it was a terrible day, then I just keep running, and it got to a point where I genuinely just wanted to keep running until I just collapse on the floor, or I don't know, run into a truck or something. So after talking to you about that, and hearing that you're on a similar journey, and you still love teaching, you still love your students and the parents and the people you work with. Just it told me that it's okay to finish a dream and finish or change aspirations. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, and you telling me about the men's groups. Just reminded me of why talking to you has meant so much to me. And it's amazing how we joke about women talking so much, and just never fucking just like always just gossiping and all that. And I tell
That's
you,
such that's such an Aussie. I love that. You couldn't be any more Aussie bloke. Bloody women always keep talking, don't they?
but every time my girlfriend comes home and she's ranting about work, some bitch at work, just terrible people at work or something. And as she's going on and she's talking for 2 hours or 3 hours, I'm thinking, on one hand, I'm going, will you shut up for fuck's sake? On the other hand, I'm thinking, man, if I could just be, if I could find a way to open up about what I'm feeling as easily as you, I'd be 3% happier.
Mm.
Like, it is, I know it's a man joke, but as much as I know that we're talking about men's mental health as a whole, there's a lot that we can learn from the women in our life, and you know, asking, instead of telling them, or saying fuck they talk too much, to actually say, well, how do you talk about that? Because is it a biological thing? Is it an innate thing? Is it environmental? I wish that men could open up as easily as women could. Now, I'm not saying it is easy for women, but there's a lot that we can learn from. So, yeah, it's good that we're living in a world where the scales, I think, are starting to balance out. But I know it's still a struggle, and we have to have a podcast like this to get this out in the public. So
Yeah. I'll just add in on this. My wife was probably the biggest. I've learnt so much from her in terms of speaking up, speaking out, knowing how to verbalize, knowing how to talk about these issues, and also just going, okay, I'm just going to give it warts and all. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm going to give it as it is. My wife is an angel, and what she's had to endure and put up with, not least with her home country being at war for God knows how long, and her hometown being desecrated and bombed, and not having the like my wife's hardships are, she doesn't have a hometown because it's bombed. She can't go back to the city where her friends are and where she studied with because that's bombed as well. So and also, there my wife was like, there were times I didn't know where my family were. I didn't know if they were alive. I had no idea. So she's been through a lot. She's lived it, and she's even was in the country at the time when the war started. So she's been through a lot, and I've been through a lot with her, and she's taught me a hell of a lot in listening and being open, and almost going, do you know what, it's better you talk, even if what you say is going to annoy me, and in the back of my mind be like, oh, shut up, just not now, not now. She's just told me that just do it, because if you don't talk about it, it's going to be like the stress valve is going to burst at the moment. If you keep it in long enough, you might do something stupid to yourself, or your brain is basically going to start filling in the gaps. And I credit her a lot in terms of helping me get through some incredibly tough times. And her and I have got a wonderful relationship where we're completely open and we're honest and we're raw with everything. And it's amazing because you go in and say, oh, there's someone who I can relate to. There's someone who understands, but there's also someone who can bounce back and say, that's bullshit, or okay, you've got a point. You've got a point as why you're thinking that. Is there a way that you can reframe it? So she's been absolutely incredible in that regard, and and my wife is someone she's my best friend. She's the only confidant I will ever trust to go and tell her everything and know that it will be understood. She may not want to hear it. She may not be in the right frame of mind herself, the energy levels, headspace. And that's something I've also learned as well, is that, yes, it's good to offload, but there's a certain point where I have to be more empathetic and more understanding of the person who I'm speaking to and going, and maybe she's not ready at this particular moment for me to talk about something. So let me just go away for a couple of hours. If I come back in a couple of hours and she's in the right frame of mind and she wants to listen, she can. If she doesn't, that's absolutely fine. So that's taught me a hell of a lot in terms of how I communicate with people, and who I can trust as well, and the kind of trust that I'm looking for. And now I'm very much, I guess I'm very spoiled in that way, because she's such a great listener and she's so knowledgeable that anyone who I've confided in, about some issues that haven't quite met that need, I'm a little bit impatient, because I'm thinking, well, my wife's awesome at it. Why aren't you awesome at it? She's really good. She's really empathetic. She listens. You're not good at that. So she's taught me a lot, and she continues to teach me a lot about how I navigate my own crazy, fragile head.
Yeah, the women in my life, our lives, they can teach us so much. My girlfriend's the same as yours, Michael, or your wife, where she, up until meeting her, and even the first few years of knowing her, my music career was still the number one priority. And for me, there's nothing wrong with putting your career as a top priority, but she never, I don't think she said this explicitly, but she did make me think that, why am I not putting myself as a top priority, let alone the people around me? Like, why is this career above me, above my family and friends? And that must have been 2 or 3 years ago, and it's the first time where I really questioned, well, other than music, what do I have? And I think a lot of musicians that I know personally, and we read about how they obsess about the art and they treat it like it's this deity, but what is it worth if you don't have people who you can talk to or turn to, or who are there on your, dare I say, your deathbed? So she taught me how to actually see that my life has other value outside of music, and incidentally, it's helped me find more meaning in my music. I'm not playing as much these days, but doing something like this, or writing, or even going back to a little bit of teaching, it takes so much pressure off, and I'm not doing it anymore because I feel like it's the only thing in my life. And she's taught me how to love, and not just get on with the job, man. I still, she still wants me to fix the balcony, but she also wants me to talk to her if I need to. So, getting into the deep end of what this conversation, this episode was going to be about, Mike, and I wouldn't like to ask you about your experience with suicide, but I think sharing it is going to be really helpful for not just me, but hopefully you as well, and people listening. So I guess when it comes to suicide, when was your first thought of suicide? When was your first time where you thought, well, this might be the only way out for you, or the only option for you?
It was, I'm trying to recall the particular year. I'm going to say 2009. So how old would I have been? Um, well, it doesn't matter. Mid-20s, so around about kind of like mid-20s ish. So that was the first time that not first time. That was the time I was aware that these negative feelings that I was feeling were now manifesting themselves into something a little bit more dangerous. And let me tell you, it grips you. When you first have these thoughts of suicide idealization, or or planning a suicide, it is all consuming. And at first, I was freaked out by it because it was, when you have these thoughts, you're like, wow, okay, and it really, really freaked me out. And then, more worryingly, I wasn't freaked out by it, and it became very, very normal. Um, and that's, so I'd say about mid-20s. That's when it kicked in. But yeah, it was a first initial shock, but then as one kind of continues to be burnt, if you will, and kind of in that kind of trauma mix and that negative situation, those initial thoughts go from wow to, oh, actually it's fairly, yeah, of course it is, of course that's a solution. You just start to rationalize it after a while.
Yeah, I remember the first time that when I started thinking that this was, well, the only option.
Mm.
You just, well, at least for me, I just try to fight that thought, because as much as it felt normal, you tell yourself, wait, thinking about killing yourself every day is not normal. And like you said, it takes so much out of you. Like you're just sitting there, and all of a sudden the thought comes in your head. Or it's even scarier when you're in a moment where things are going well. I might be having dinner with my girlfriend, and all of a sudden the thought just pops up, and going, wow, where did that come from? It's like a freight train that just hits you. But
Yeah.
I guess for you, Mike, was this would have been, correct me if I'm wrong with the timelines, but was this when your music career as a performer, as a cruise performer in your bands, was that starting to really kick off, where you were really full time and just playing music or performing?
Oh gosh, no, that was probably the one of the worst times. The best and the worst, because the couple of bands that I were in were making some headroom, and we were gigging in and around London, so we were kind of creating a little bit of a buzz, and I was enjoying that. That was like, I think 2008 was probably I would say the last year where I was actually really enjoying life. Excuse me, enjoying music, because I just reestablished my study at undergrad. So I restarted my second year in jazz conservatoire. Um, I had joined an awesome band. I was back in London. So I kind of had a lot going for me, and I just felt this sense of, this is pretty cool. This is awesome. We're on to a winner. And then kind of, life happened around about 2009, and then it just completely gutted me. Like, it really hit me harder than it should, but it really just smashed me. And then it was kind of downhill. So when I started those suicidal thoughts, it was probably at a time personally I wasn't going through good things. I was started to be disinterested in my program, but that's probably because I was going through a bit of a bad time at home, in terms of my personal life. Yeah, and it just, I would say it derailed a lot of the good things. I wasn't necessarily in a bad spot in terms of career, far from it. I was a year away from graduating. I'd kind of practiced and worked up and to get to a pretty decent standard, and I felt fairly confident of, leaving conservatoire and giving it a good go in terms of my career. But on reflection now, it was those suicidal thoughts and what was happening in my life. It just completely consumed me, and took away all of my focus and took away everything that I'd been working up to at that point. And I just became absolutely obsessed with these thoughts, and they were just there, and I couldn't shake it. I couldn't get out of it. There wasn't really an option of going back home, because, like I said, home is in the middle of nowhere up in Lincolnshire, and if I go back home, I probably wouldn't be able to restart again. I saw going back home as truly the end, because it just, that place in Lincoln just represented that. It represented this void, where nothing happens, and you can just say goodbye to any kind of life, and home life wasn't particularly great there too. So I went, look, I'm just going to have to persevere with this. I think that staying in this situation is far better than going back home, because that situation that I have now wouldn't have been fixed. like I said before, that the support, I didn't have any support network. I didn't have a strong connection with friends and family where I could get better. So if I go back home, it would have got even worse. I knew I was broken, and I knew I was fucked up with all of these things. I just didn't know. I just didn't know what to think and what to do and how to get out of it.
If I can ask, Michael, I know you said there was a lot going on in your life, and
Yeah.
it seemed like this was just this. It was the perfect storm, if you could use that metaphor, where it just
Mm.
built up into this perfect storm. But was there a specific moment or moments that led to that first thought?
Well, I mean, it was one singular moment, and then that kind of, I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And then the floodgates opened, and then I was talking with a good friend at the time who was the only person I would say was there, who kind of understood what I was going through and did a lot to help me out of that situation. And yeah, he pinpointed my mental breakdown and the whole and everything going bad. He pinpointed that to say that's probably some unresolved stuff that you've had in your past that you haven't really dealt with, and that's basically caught up with you. If we're going back to linking it with musicians, um, my idea of that was, you see it happening with musicians, but they're able to channel that through their art, and they're able to channel that through the recordings and the music that they make. And I thought to myself, rather naively, I can do that. I'm a musician. I will just use this pain and all of this crap that's happened, and I'll use it for good. I'm going to turn it into good. But I didn't have the mental strength, and I didn't have that. I didn't have that in me to do that. And it's like, well, so now what do I rely on? So musicians are good in a way. We're good in a way that we can use music, like you said before. It can be therapeutic, but at the same time, it can be a bloody curse as well. And certainly, when I realized I couldn't use music to get out of this situation, it's like, well, where else? I don't have another coping strategy. I don't have anything in my locker to help me out of this. And it became to the point where I resented music, and I resented my choice to be a musician, because it was meant to be the thing that would take me out of a lot of things, and it didn't. All those ambitions were slowly starting to disintegrate, and I realized all of the things that I wanted to use music for, it wasn't doing it for me. All of my so-called friends weren't there at a time when I particularly needed them, and it all kind of found itself in this cloud of suicidal thoughts. And I think I was just trying my best. I guess I was using it as an out. I need a way out. I need to start again. I need to hit I need to hit pause on the controller, go to the menu, quit game, and then come back in and restart again, or go to for those who remember, go to my memory card, reboot, and start again. And I often think about that. I often think back to times in my life and go, God, if only I could just go back just to a particular moment and like find another save state in this game and just play from there. And now better. Just go and play from there and see if you can make it right. There are times where I just look at that and I get so frustrated that I wish I could just take a save state and go back and do it differently. And who knows, I might not have the same feelings and thoughts towards suicide like I do today, or I might have made it worse, or not make it better at all. But I just, gosh, if I could just do that again, if I could go back to that moment again with clarity, with more emotional intelligence, more life experience, and then I think I can give myself a shot of getting through it. Because that's the one thing that I look at that period, Brian. I don't know whether you have the same. Is that there was a massive amount of regret, huge regret and guilt of that period, and a regret of a wasted life, a regret of a wasted time in my life where my peers were going off and living their best life and being the best musicians that they possibly could do. And I never fully realized that. I look at that and I do have a tinge of sadness and regret and a little bit of bitterness that because of that shit experience that happened to me and those thoughts of suicide, it robbed me of the thing I could have become. And because I know I'm quite resourceful and resilient anyway, you can't fix the past, but you can absolutely look at what's happened and go, right, well, I can make sure I can try and fix the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you're here and still here. You know, I hope that you don't regret it as much now, or as you get a bit older, as life continues, that you regret it less. Because I feel very similarly to you, Michael. Where I guess I'm a little bit younger than you, but when I went into uni, I was 23, so a little bit older, a more mature age student. And I felt at that time that was when I would reach my quote unquote peak. These are my years. I spent a bit of time traveling, started building my own music school, saved a bit of money. Now is the time where I really take the opportunity. And things just didn't work out the way that I would like it to have worked out. And now it's been 5 years, and I don't play a lot of guitar. I haven't done a gig in, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. Haven't done a gig where I'm performing in about 2 years. I still do the odd gig every now and then for my students. And there's a bit of me where I do think, oh man, I didn't give it a good old crack. I didn't try tour the world for 1 year, busking on the street and selling albums for $3 or 3 pesos or whatever. Apparently I'm in Mexico, and or there's a part of me that that sort of wishes I could have changed things. Nowadays I think if it doesn't, well, I'm just gonna have to be okay with it. I know that for the music that I play, the fingerstyle guitar, acoustic guitar stuff, a lot of people who are well known in that field tend to be blooming later in life. So someone like Tommy Emmanuel, he's my biggest hero, and he only really started his acoustic solo career when he was about 40. He was on every major TV show and band. He played with everyone in Australia and England.
Yeah.
But he really only started his solo acoustic career when he was 40, and he only became sober from drugs and alcohol when he was 55, which amazed me. I thought when he started his solo career, that's when he went on the straight and narrow. But he got himself sober when he was 55. It's a long time. So, but I hope that you don't regret it. You regret it less as you get a bit older, because maybe what you're doing now, or definitely what you're doing now, as far as I see, is far more important, not just for you, but the people that you share and work with. It's far more important than doing a gig. I mean, gigs are cool, and you're not a jazz musician anymore, so your life's work is over. But
oh, thank you for that. As you were talking, I was just kind of listening and just I think things.
I'm glad you were listening. Thanks.
Well, it's all right. It makes a change. I was just thinking about kind of listeners who are listening into this, and it's almost that feeling of if it's not going to happen now, will it happen tomorrow? I'll go back to your point about you hopefully playing guitar. I think if you really, in your heart of heart, if you want it and you just have that unconditional feeling that, yes, I do, I want to do this, and I'm going to be happy being on stage, playing and doing this. If it's from that genuine place of sincerity and just a very healthy dose of ambition, I think you'll find yourself on stage one day, Brian, doing it, and lo and behold, maybe thinking about cutting an album or doing that tour. So I sincerely wish that for you, Brian, I really hope that you'll find that moment in your life where you'll just get your mojo back and you're like, no, I'm doing this because I absolutely want to. And I feel like I've got all of the power behind me to do it. Because once you have that, that's, as you know, that's that moment is from a place of love. It's from a place of positivity. It's from a place of health, and it's done for the right reasons. That means that you likely would never find yourself back in that position that you were in years ago when you were struggling. And that's what I say to all people listening now, is that if you can find that right frame of mind and it feels good, then it's right. If it doesn't feel good, like Brian said earlier on, don't do it. Just it's you are not your music, and you are worth more than what you think you might produce in terms of a musician. It's just really not worth it. It's not worth it for yourself. It's not worth it for your loved ones. Just kind of bow out and say, do you know what? I'm not going to put myself through that.
Yeah, definitely, Michael. And if you make the decision to step away and not go down that route because you know something is wrong, then to me that shows more courage and resilience than getting up on stage and trying to play the best you can. Of course, there's resilience and courage in both ways. It's very rare for an artist, a musician, or creator to get up on stage and perform and do that for a long time and not address these issues. They either live a long life that is miserable away from the stage, or they don't live a long life. There's only two ways for them. Whereas, the handful of people that I know personally, and some big names, I guess Ed Sheeran might be the best example. Lewis Capaldi, he will talk about his anxiety and Tourette syndrome and how that's affected his life, and how he just struggles with performing, and he made the decision to step away and not tour for 2 years, and he knew what the consequences would be. He knew that he may fade away into oblivion and be forgotten in today's world, but he stuck to his guns, and he knew that he had to do this if he wanted to not just have a long music career, but a long life. And Ed Sheeran's done the same thing, where he steps away from the limelight. Of course, every now and then he'll just pop up on a talk show, but he doesn't do press tours. He doesn't do all that. And I think having someone as a role model in the public eye, those two are the best examples today. And
Yeah.
I would love to have a career at some point where I'm touring, performing around the world. And my dream, if I still have a dream, is just one day do a solo set at the Opera House, Sydney Opera House. Now, is that going to happen? I'm only going to do it if I know that mentally and physically I'm in a better place. I'm healthy as I can be. Financially, I know I can invest and fund into it. And also, my relationships with my girlfriend, friends and family are strong, so that if I am away on the road for a little while, at least I know how to keep in contact with them and know how to reach out, and also have access to healthcare, perhaps overseas. And I think that's the one thing that gives me confidence. I still know that at some point in the future I'm gonna fall back into that dark place. I hope not, but life is going to happen. There's going to be a lot more stressful things that will happen in the future. But if I do, then I'll be better equipped to find a way to get through and endure the pain than perhaps 5 or 6 years ago. So, for a lot of young artists or young musicians or even seasoned musicians, to just take a break and step away. In fact, maybe the way to go these days is to be a part-time performer or a part-time tour. The days of doing 12-week, 16-week tours on the road for 350 days of the year, I'm not sure if that's sustainable, unless if you can afford it, and maybe if you're not married, I guess. So I do know a couple of people personally who have decided they are going to just do 100 days on the road, which is still a lot. That's a lot of days away from home. And I do remember talking to one of my guitar friends and one of my favorite guitarists, Mike Dawes. This was back in 2017, where he was really starting to hit his straps. He was opening for Justin Hayward and the Moody Blues, but his solo career was starting to bloom at this time. And I asked him, how do you how do you deal and enjoy? Do you enjoy being away from home and just constantly being on the road? And he said, "Look, I got to be honest. It's the rock star lifestyle, and he's so lucky that he got this gig. He's got this gig with Justin Hayward. At the same time, coming home, he reminds himself that he's only home for 3 weeks. He just bluntly said to me, Brian, if you're okay with being on the road for 11 months of the year, being away from family, friends, and go for it. You know, I said, that is. It was the first time where someone this was in 2017. I was 19, and up until that point, everyone was like, "Oh, it's an amazing lifestyle. It's so fun. Yeah, it's so worth it." And Mike said, like, playing for a crowd of 10,000 people, 15,000 people at a blues festival where everyone is just cheering, and you got the crowd in the palm of your hands with one guitar, is awesome. But that only happens for 30 minutes a day or 1 hour a day. The rest of it, you got to find time to just keep your mind busy. Otherwise, you're going to be reminded of how lonely you are and how you haven't seen your mates for 6 months. And if you have a wife or partner, you haven't seen them. So, yeah, the homesickness is real. And that's why a lot of artists really struggle, And, now when I talk to young artists and young students who I still teach, I tell them, look, you got to be okay with that. If you're not, then you could just go on tour for 3 months, and spread it out across the year. You may not make as much money as you'd like to, and I know we shouldn't talk about money, but that might be the realistic way to go if you're going to do this for 20 or 30 years. So,
yeah, you're absolutely spot on, and I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of what we desire as musicians. Like, well, what are you prepared to sacrifice? It's like, yes, we all want to go and headline the Pyramid Stage at Glastonbury. We all want to have, a top streaming album on all the charts. But what are you prepared to sacrifice for that? And is that sacrifice worth it? Is that a sacrifice which plays upon your values, your ethics, and your beliefs? Because if it isn't, then you're going to find yourself, shall I say, unwell, like you and I, Brian, had in that situation where we had an ideal and somehow the realities didn't fit the ideal, but then there was a case of, well, now what? This isn't what I imagined. And in my case, when it all started to fall apart, it's like I don't have a plan B. I don't have anything I can get around, I didn't necessarily think that far ahead in terms of all of the problems that I might encounter. I think it's spot on, if you're like you said, if you're happy with being on the road for 11 months of the year, if that's what we want to do, then fine. But that's, I think one needs to think about that. There are more important things in life than music. There are more important things. And if you are going to put yourself first, which we all should, absolutely, once you find that and you can let go of any connections or connotations with being something that you might think you want to be, then things will start to work out. And then as in my experience, as I get older and more wiser and more mature, then you can develop a different relationship with aspects. And that, I think that's the thing that will certainly keep myself on the straight and narrow in terms of making sure that my mindset and my ethics and values and beliefs have changed since the time when I was unwell, because if they haven't, I've wasted all that time. But if they have, then that means I can put some healthy distance between what happened and essentially, move on with life and just understand that there is more important things than aspiring to this or aspiring to whatever ambitions. Like you said, it's all rooted on yourself, and it's all rooted on what you want, and it's all rooted in really picking the values which are gonna be the best for you. So yeah. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now. So
no, I feel the same way. Where that's just something that for centuries musicians and artists just don't say it. it is. I find it a little bit ridiculous when you say it out loud to a non-musician. When you say, "Oh, I live for the art. It's this beautiful thing," and it's very glamorized, and it is a very philosophical thing. And I know this
Mm,
goes against every modern contemporary piece of advice that you get, not just from musicians, but entrepreneurs and gurus and experts. But if you plan to live a long life and a long, healthy life where you want to work at something that you enjoy, so let's say 60 years, let's say if you start your professional career at 20, let's say 20, and you
yeah.
plan to live a long life until you're 85, there's 45 or 50 years where you can work on your craft, you know? And
Mm,
if you rest for 5 or 10 of those years, I think that's okay. And maybe that is as simple as the message needs to be, you know? Um, so on that note, Mike, there's one thing I wanted to ask, and this is, you can share as much as you are comfortable with, but when you were going through those suicidal thoughts and you were in the midst of your suicidal ideation, did you uh, did you do anything, or um, was it purely just thoughts? And did
oh
you
yeah,
seek?
oh yeah, yeah, oh yeah. Twice, absolutely. Yeah, I gave it a good go. I did. So it was the idealization, it was the preparation, and then yeah, twice. I would say like, twice seriously, and then a dozen or so. I call them danger close moments. You know, where you're researching and you're looking. You know, there were plenty of those. Planning. I've forgotten what they call it now, but anyway. So I'd say twice definitely, and then a dozen or so. Like, let's plan this out. Let's be meticulous with this all. Um, so, and then that's also in addition to the idolization. The thoughts that were depending on my health would be either a daily occurrence, or might be a weekly occurrence, or it might just be like just a fleeting moment, like just a couple of minutes, and then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, right, okay, let's clear up, let's get my head in the game, and then kind of move on.
How did you find a way to? What did you do to try to get through? Did you seek help? Was therapy part of the equation?
Mm-mm. Yeah, not. I seeked help, but not for a very long time. Like, I mean, I had one person who kind of helped me out of it and kind of got me through it, so to speak. But I would say it was a really see with the getting rid of the eating disorders. It almost felt to me like a very gradual and easy process to go from I have an issue I have a bad relationship with food to I have a normal relationship with food, and it was almost instantaneous. It just kind of I don't particularly think there was any moment. I just kind of all of a sudden woke up and going, oh, all right, don't think I have an eating disorder anymore. With the mental illness, it was painful because every time I thought I was making progress, or at least I was doing something and talking about it, you know, there'd always be something else that resurfaced, or there'd be something that happened that would force me to think about these things. I wouldn't say right now I'm out of the woods in terms of true health, and that's my next goal. Is that if I can conquer my eating disorder, I think I got a pretty good chance of conquering my mental illness and my mental health issues because, well, I haven't experienced it yet, but I'm pretty certain that there is a way where one can live a life and not be thinking about ending my life or thinking about bad things. I'm sure of it. That's one thing I haven't quite sorted, but more to the point, to answer your question in terms of therapy, yeah, I struggled through, and then um, yeah, probably about mid 30s, I wanted to enlist the help of a professional. So I paid for a private therapist, and that's probably one of the best decisions that I ever made in terms of my health, because I just kind of been trundling along and really stumbling from one mental crisis to another in my mind. And I'm like, I'm really pissed off with this. It's like, this has just got to stop. I cannot put my wife through this. I cannot put myself through this. I feel like I'm going to absolutely, train wreck some really important things in my life. I've really got to fix this. And I worked with this amazing therapist, I would say full time, if you will, for about 2.5 years, I think. Yeah, it would have been 2.5 years. And that helped me tremendously. And it really, he's very good. And it just sorted out a lot of the things that I had troubles with. It hadn't completely eradicated. And as he told me, it's like, sorry, kid, this is going to be a lifelong thing. Even contradicts what I said about getting healthy. But I think what he meant to say was, you're going to have to deal with this for the rest of your life. How you deal with it is actually determined how much how much you know about it, and how much you're able to make sure you don't put yourself into situations where you're feeling or gonna feel suicidal, and give yourself the best possible chance to live healthily. And if it means giving up things that once before you thought of as true or necessary part of your career or your personality or your identity, if those things are harming you, then let them go, because they're not worth it. They're really not worth the struggle. So that really set me on a good path, and I think it made me a lot more aware of my living with mental illness for the majority of my life. But it also, from his conversations and his help, it enabled me to go in and actually go and say, I want to speak to you, Brian, about this, because you seems like you've got a similar story to I. It makes it it made it more easier for me to be open and share my mental illness troubles and illnesses, but put it into a story where someone can listen to it and resonate or get help with. It basically gave me the confidence to share and to say to myself, you've got all this lived in experience. You've got so much in the bank in terms of what you've been through. Surely not now is a good time to put that to good use and see if you can help someone. So it's although therapy has absolutely helped me come to terms with a lot of things, it hasn't completely cured me of everything, but at least that way I'm able to have the clarity and confidence to go and discuss it and go, do you know what? If I can help in some way, then that's a pretty cool thing, because I certainly, oh my word, I certainly needed that when I was in my mid-20s, and I didn't get that. So
that's wonderful, Michael. And that's one of the more real answers I've heard to the question, me asking that question of us. A couple of people I know, how they try to manage their struggles with whether it's depression or suicidal ideation. And what you said about you having to deal with eating disorder and potentially these suicidal thoughts for the rest of your life, that's something that my GP told me the start of last year. And at the time, it felt like a gut punch. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's a wrap on the rest of the life. And, happiness, what is that? But it just made things more real to know that, well, is there ever going to be a point in my life, in our lives, where we're going to be 100% happy, where we're jumping for joy and we don't have a care in the world? Maybe the last time that I truly felt just fully blissful was maybe when I was in school, when you're in
yeah,
kindergarten or that's
absolutely.
probably the last realistic time. And for you took control of what you can control, and that is seeking help and finding ways to manage these thoughts. And that's what I've tried to do. And firstly, to what you said about therapy, I want people to know that going to therapy is not this magical cure. And that was what helped me take the intimidation factor out of it, because up until last year, I was in and out of therapy about a decade. I cancelled more sessions than I did attend. And the
Yeah.
moment, it took me so long, and when my GP said, you're probably never going to be 100% happy, you're never going to be a 10 out of 10, or maybe not never, but it's unlikely. but you might be a 6, you might be a 7, and that's pretty good, you know. If you're like that every day, then I think that's a pretty good life. And that helped me realize that therapy is trying to get 1% better. It's not, I'm not going in thinking I'm going to come out of this feeling like a new man, like $1,000,000, you know? And
Mm,
I can
yeah.
tell you now, every time I've come out of therapy, even the therapy sessions that I didn't want to go to early on, every time I come out of therapy, I always feel just a little bit lighter and just a little bit of weight lift. And even though that feeling is temporary, now I try to tell myself, if I go to 10 therapy sessions or 12 or 50 or however many, maybe that feeling of being light, the pressure lifting, it might last a little bit longer, you know, if you keep going to therapy and keep reaching out. So, you know, I hope that that's something that people can understand. It's not this magical cure. It takes time. It takes a lot of work. And I know you've done a lot of work with therapy and trying to get better.
I got thank you for that. I'm just gonna, because ADHD kicks in, and like if I don't ask this question now, I will end up thinking about dinosaurs, which I don't want, and you don't want, and the audience doesn't want. No, I'm going to say this, for you, Brian. What thoughts, feelings make you feel lighter? What is the thing that gives you the relief to know that I'm gonna go and crack on tomorrow because I've given myself a chance? What is it that gives you that sense of lightness and uh, optimism?
I think there's a couple of things, but the first thing that comes to mind, especially when I come out of a therapy session, is that, you know, my life is worth living and I have something to live for. So, and that could be many things. That could be as trivial as making a coffee and trying to somehow perfect latte art, or, you know, get some good beans or whatever, or as big and simple as, you know, my family, my friends. You know, there's, you know, as much as I know it's a cliche and I know that it's all generic, but it's true. I know a couple of people who feel very lonely, and they always say, "Oh, I wish I was closer with my parents," or my parent, if they've lost their parents, so they say, "I wish my parents are still here." You know, my girlfriend, I, 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 I try not to think about a future where, you know, she'll say, you know, what about our future family and future children?
Mm,
And for me, I used to think that way and go, yeah, I'm missing out on so much. But to me, that stuff has not happened. Like, trying to think about something that hasn't happened just puts more pressure. So I just try to say, well, I'm going to live for you today. And what are we
yeah,
going to do today? And if we're seeing your parents, if I'm seeing my parents, my best friend, I'm going to live for that moment. I'll live for them today. So those tend to be the two biggest things for me. And every now and then I might think, well, you know, I think I still have a lot to achieve in life. I don't know what it is, but I'd like to find out. And, you know, there's a lot of trivial things that are a bit of fun. You know, career stuff comes and goes. But I know that when it comes to family and friends, they stay there forever, pretty much. So yeah,
yeah.
you know, I know it's a generic and cliche answer, but that's it for me. What about yourself?
It's not, if it's true for you, mate. Then that is true for you. Who cares if it's generic or cliche? And that's not generic or cliche. That's absolutely wonderful. Um, for me, what gives me the greatest sense of hope is that it's probably a rather negative way of looking at it, but what gives me a greater sense of hope is that I won't end up being homeless again, or I won't end up being in a really shit situation. When I get really bad, it's because I'm what's that term they called? Not doom scrolling, but you're thinking, ruminating about kind of bad things, right? Um, for me, when I get a sense that the future that I want to have for myself won't happen, and in conversely it will happen in a really negative light, that really sends me through the roof, because I just cannot live with this knowledge of knowing that I'm one step closer to, you know, it being absolutely shit again. So when I have these rare feelings of just living in the moment, it's because I just have this sense of, actually, the future isn't as bad as you think it is. The future is the future will be all right. It will be all right. And the moment I start to question that, is, I guess, it's a little bit like the Back to the Future scene where Marty McFly looks at the photo and everything that he does then affects the future. So his family member, he disappears. And you laugh, right? And I know a lot of people will laugh, and you can, but I see it like that. I like every day I look at the picture and I go, depending what's happened, if something in my mind's happened that I think to myself, well, that's going to affect this. I can kind of slowly see images disappear, and that really freaks me out. So I'm far better when you can't, like you said, you can't control the future, but I have a far better sense of calmness and at least health when I know that things that are happening right now aren't necessarily going to be a detriment to the future. But yeah, that's probably why I'm still trying to get through to that next stage of my health, is because I need to stop thinking about the things I can't control, or at least stop worrying about things that haven't happened, or second guessing things that happen. And 2 + 2 equals, dinosaur. I need to actually develop a healthier way of looking at life. And I think if I adopted your approach, Brian, I probably would have a better chance of going, yeah, all right. There is you can have some sustained periods where it's all right. You can have periods where it's not great, but it's a damn sight better than having to worry and think all the time of, well, that hasn't happened, so that means that won't happen, or this didn't happen, or this isn't happening, so that means that won't happen. It's a lot more healthier to think of it in terms of your way.
Oh, it's a first step for you, Michael. And look, I still struggle with having those dark thoughts and similar thoughts to what you have, where I start to spiral and I start ruminating and catastrophizing what may or may not happen in the future. I guess now I try to come back to that single thought of family and friends, and there are other things in my life that give me meaning and value, but it's just what you can control, and or what is within your grasp, and what I can see, and what I am more certain about that is going to be there for a long time. And like for example, performing on tour, and then performing in front of a crowd, doing a solo set, performing at the opera house. That I may only get a chance to do that once or twice, or a handful of times in my life, and afterwards the show finishes. And so it's a first step. And I, as much as I'd like to say that I am strong and strong-minded and I've found a way, I still have to fight all those thoughts every day. Today I woke up, finally got out of bed at 11:30, and for the last 5 or 6 days in a row, I've been getting up at 11, and for the first 2 hours, I have to tell myself, "Come on, you can get on with the day. You can get on with the day." Not because I got 50 tasks to do, or because I plan to go on a long run, or I got something important to do. Just because I want to be able to live, and I got something to live for, and my girlfriend's going to come home, and she'd like me to be there. And tomorrow I'm catching up with a mate of mine, or I'm talking to Michael tonight. I'm sure he'd like me to be there. Just try to get through the next hour. As to use a cricketing term, and this was something that I kind of stole from when Phil Hughes passed away, now 11 years ago. Michael Clarke, the captain at the time, he said in his eulogy, and it's just the best way of fusing cricket with life. He said, "We must dig in and get through the tea." And I just went, I think I'm going to use that. So anytime I'm struggling and I just don't want to get out of bed, or the thought that comes in my head, that voice that says, "Yeah, it's not worth living. You should off yourself today." I just tell myself, "Okay, let's dig in and try to get through the tea." Just try to dig in, get through the tea as much as I can. But yeah, that's look, you're an inspiration to me, and talking to you knowing that we're on a similar pathway, to know that you're doing everything you can to get better, just gives me a lot of confidence to know that I'm doing something right as well. So before we end, Mike, in our first episode, I call it spanking the plank. I'm going to call this twanging the clanger, but it won't be too many questions. I just got one.
That's even better phrase. Yeah, I'm glad that you've rephrased it to that. Yeah, good
At
on
some,
you.
at some point, I'll come up with a more set term. I'm actually going to move the microphone away because the microphone just can.
Maybe less innuendo or more innuendo. I don't know.
Could be, pulling my G string. That's there's so many. We're both guitarists. A couple of questions I wanted to ask you to wrap up today's episode, and I'm so grateful for your time, and I know that to me that this almost just felt like a conversation that we just have. When we catch up, we have these conversations. There is a little bit more R-rated content that doesn't make the final cut. So just of course, jump onto Patreon, join Patreon or my Substack. The paid subscriptions, four repayments of $99.99, and you get a free App Circle Pro with it as well. So, this first question is a little bit of tongue in cheek, maybe a little bit of a dig at the stigma and society as a whole. We'll have a bit of fun, and then I'll finish off with a more serious and maybe a sentimental question. But the first question is, what are some misunderstandings or mindsets when it comes to mental illness, mental health, suicide that you find frustrating, that you rant about, and you would like to just demystify right now? And this can be what you feel personally. It doesn't have to be necessarily what society thinks. It's just myths and misunderstandings that you've come across in your life, and you just want to say, fuck this shit. This is not true.
I would say the big thing is performative sincerity or empathy. Not least for suicide. I mean, obviously, if you're going to go and talk with your colleague at the water cooler, it's like, how are you today? I wanted to end my life today. I'm not talking that because that's obviously a different topic. But if you can ask someone how they are and you have an inkling that they're not doing well, be prepared to listen. Be prepared to sit down for a cup of coffee and go, all right, I'm going to listen to you. Because there's nothing worse than people going through the mire, and trust me, we know, where someone says, "Oh, how's it going?" and deep down, well, you're asking me that, but you're probably doing it because you have to, you feel like you need to, or you want to feel like in yourself that you're helping. It's far better for people who are suffering to let them know, hey, look, sorry, mate, I just don't have this time at this very moment. But it doesn't mean I don't care. So I'm just going to have a quick check-in. Is it good? It's crap. All right, listen, like use that cricket analogy, dig in, get through to tea. All right, just you keep going. I'm thinking of you. Just something little like that would be perfect, because the amount of times that I've had situations where I felt like, say, colleagues were supportive, and it turns out that in their really clumsy attempt of being supportive that they weren't supportive, is a lot worse feeling to me than being ignored, because you don't want to give people a sense of hope that someone's caring for them when they're not. Do you know what I mean? So I reckon it's a case of, if you're prepared to listen, and also another thing to say is that if you can't help, be honest to say, I can't help. This is way above my thinking and my processing, and I'm just not used to people doing this. Be honest and say, I can't even relate to you, in that way. And I feel your pain, but I have no idea. But I can certainly understand why you're getting through it and why it is tough. So I think if there's a little bit more sincerity with the compassion and the sympathy, that would be a lot more easier than rather than this performative, oh, make sure you talk to someone and make sure you do this, make sure you do that, because actually when it comes to true help to help someone out of the mire, no assistance program and no company policy is really going to do that. The real help that you and I, Brian, hopefully know is that actually if you need that, go to see a professional, go to see someone who gets it and understands it and knows exactly how to talk to you to get yourself better. So I would say, in terms of that one, stop with the performative sympathy. Just be honest. I'd rather much people be honest with me and say, "Oh, that's a bit heavy, mate. Sorry, buddy. I'm gonna have to bow out on this one." It's like, yep, totally understand. No worries. That would help me, and I'd imagine hopefully others, rather than giving the impression or the illusion that someone at least cares or is trying to do something.
Yeah, definitely. That just shows there's so much power in just listening, and not trying to become the fixer, And it reminds me of, this is something I learned from going to therapy consistently, where it took me a long time to find a good therapist, and that's one thing I want to say is that, you know, if you struggle with finding a therapist that gets you, you're allowed to change. Hopefully, I know that it's different country to country, city to city with accessibility, but you're allowed to look for someone different. It might sound weird, but I started treating going to therapy like checking in with a mate and a friend, where most of my mates I know don't have diagnosed depression, or they've never had a suicidal thought in their life. I have mates who do, but most of my mates don't. And when I started talking to my mates about this, they'd often say, "I don't know how to answer to that." And I would, after that, I'd just say, "You just listening for the last 45 minutes has taken so much weight out of me, and for you to just be willing to sit for 45 minutes and zip it and listen, even though you have no idea what to say or do, just means so much to me." And it tells me that, they're willing to take that time out of their day to listen to something that is not fun to listen to, and maybe one day they'll find a solution. And the first time that really happened for me, it was last year. My best friend and I, we were driving somewhere. I think it was, we were just driving along the country road, and he says, "How you going? How's it feeling after you shut down the school?" And I told him, "Look, I feel numb and I am so empty. The best way I can describe it is that I feel like I'm just existing. I am watching a shadow of myself in front of me, and it's like I'm watching life in front of me. I'm watching a version of me just slowly deteriorate in front of me, slowly to my end." And he just looked at me and said, "I don't know how to respond to that." But he said it in such a way that I could hear that he wanted to say something. He wanted a way to help. He was like, I don't know how to, like, it was so soft. And I said to him, "You don't have to say anything, just I really appreciate you listening." And for the rest of the day, he just essentially put his arm around me and said, "You got to relax, let's play some golf." And I'm like, "Fuck that. No, I feel better now. Fuck that." So no, like, just, there's so much power in just listening. And on the flip side, it is tough for people who know someone struggling, because we're not taught to be empathetic in that sense. If someone had cancer or broke their leg, we're quick to be empathetic in that way, because it's more, well, not more, but slightly more black and white. Whereas with anything mental illness related, it's harder to see. So it is a challenge. So both sides need to be educated in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, right on.
But so the last thing I wanted to ask you, Mike, let's say I'd love to know, and I reckon a lot of people listening would love to know, what are you doing now to, along with therapy, but other things in your life, what are you doing to manage those dark thoughts, manage eating disorder, depression, suicidal
Yeah.
ideation? And if someone came to you, especially a young person, a young man, 18, 19 years old, and said, "Hey, I think I'm starting to feel these thoughts. I don't know who you are. I've just, I've just said hello. I'm a complete stranger, but is there anything I could do to just try to get through the next little period?" What would you say to them?
So, well, I'll answer the last question first, and then the other one afterwards. First and foremost, if someone reached out, depending on where they are mentally, I could potentially offer a hey, look, I don't know you, but do you want to kind of meet up on Zoom and you can have a little chat just face to face? Because it's always better, isn't it, to do that rather than writing. Again, I say this because I'm not a medical professional. Just I'm someone with lived in experience. A bit like yourself, I'd probably just have a listen and just kind of go, right, well, tell me what's on your mind, and I think if it's going to be somebody of that age, I would imagine they're kind of in the beginning they're at the beginning of their journey, so to speak, with it. And what you want to do is essentially tell them, right, you've probably just begun this journey, but you will need to find ways, set things up to get off that journey, because the longer you're on the journey, the longer you can't get off it. And there's a certain point where like you're on it for so long, you're just walking down that road and you just have to deal with it, and that's what you don't want, really. So I would, of course, listen, non-judgmental, and have a listen, and then I think just kind of talk about, right, well, let's think about the practicalities. Do you have anyone around? Do you have anyone who else you can you can talk to on a more consistent basis? First and foremost, do you have access to help? GP, speaking to your GP. If you can confide in them, and then somehow get a perhaps a diagnosis from them, and get at least, if it's at that stage, medication, just to take the edge off before you have any form of counseling and therapy would greatly help. So I would just kind of offer those kind of bare bone advice, and just say, look, thanks for chatting with me. Just whatever you need to do, as much as it is tough, you need to find a little bit more strength just to pull yourself out of it, and just do everything you need to squash it, and get through it as quickly as possible. Not as quickly as possible. Get through it more methodically as possible, rather than let it fester and linger, because it will never disappear. And the first question was in terms of what I'm doing on the day to day. Well, as ironically, as we're talking about medication, I actually stopped taking medication. I stopped taking it at the beginning of January. Well, at least decreasing medication, and now to the point where I'm off it. And I've done so because when you're on any medication, stopping cold turkey is the worst thing you can do, because it brings more problems than it does. So when you're on medication, with your GP's help, if you want to go off it, you need to slowly decrease and just manage that, so that your body and your brain can get used to producing certain chemicals in order to keep you on the low. So I think, as in terms of irony, is that actually, even though I am feeling a lot, even I'm feeling like I'm exposed to a lot more because I don't have the medication to take the edge off, in a very strange way, I actually feel a lot more better. Partly because I feel more like myself again, and I'm getting my energy back, and I'm getting my productivity back, and I'm getting my focus back, which in turn is making me feel a lot more better, because I'm actually feel like I'm getting things done. When I was on medication, it was a nightmare, because it kind of dampened everything. So that natural sense that we have of meeting a deadline or working or something, where our adrenaline normally kicks in, and we get into that work mode, like, we're going to get it done. But because I was so nullified with everything, like there was no urgency, so I find myself missing deadlines, or not at least working to that urgency, partly because the meds just kind of took the edge off, and I'm like, I need to function better. So coming off the meds have been really, really good. And I think the biggest thing for me, that is not completely helping, but it's given me little senses of hope, is doing things to take control of the future and take control of my destiny. So rather than sit and ruminate and panic and think negatively and get into those thoughts, I'm trying to do something. I'm just actively going out and just being productive and just, you know, seeing what I can personally do to take myself out of this predicament and just try and make a better future. So that's having control and having agency is a big thing, which I find really, really helps. So in combination of taking the medication out and taking more agency and almost going in and just having that sense of, right, I need to dig deep now, I need to start doing things, have elevated my mood slightly. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm right as rain, but I'm certainly got a bit more confidence in myself, and certainly more confidence in my ability to go, right, I can fix this. I just need to do a few things, and then if I can do them right and I can have the right attitude towards them, then maybe I find myself in a bit more of a healthy position.
That makes me so happy to hear. All right. Well, thanks so much, Mike. It's been another pleasure, and I'd love to have you back for another episode. We'll talk more shit. We'll get even deeper and darker. But on a serious note, firstly, thank you for being willing to open up and talk about what was the darkest period of your life. In saying that, though, a lot of good has come out of it afterwards. And again, we talk about cliches, but perhaps I don't know if you needed to go through that. But if you find a way to get through such terrible and traumatic periods and come out of it, doing okay, then that shows that you have more strength than you know. You have more strength and belief and courage than you know. And hopefully, as you continue on, you start to believe that and you become more confident. I mean, I know that you know what you're good at, and you know what your skills are, what you're good at, what you're not good at. So I just hope that if you do reflect on what happened, that you don't regret it too much. Like it happened, and you never want that sort of situation to happen to anyone. But
Mm.
unfortunately, it did.
Yeah.
But you found a way to get through, and however way that way was, you did find a way. So that just shows that you have a lot of resilience, mate. So yeah, you got to give yourself credit for that. And I know a lot of people who listen to this and will listen to this, they might look at their own journeys and realize themselves that, hey, I got a bit of strength myself, and I found a way to get through this tough shit that was going on. So yeah, I hope you believe that yourself. So thank you so much, Mike.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Brian. It's always a joy talking to you on these shows, and yeah, looking forward to the next episode. And also on behalf, because I read a lot of your comments anyway on LinkedIn. There's a lot of people who are thankful that you're doing this, and there's a lot of people thankful for your newsletter. So you are reaching a lot of people with this one. So thanks for all your efforts to make all of this work, and and long may it continue, because I think you're fighting the good fight, and you're representing a voice which needs to be heard, and it needs a platform. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Mike. I'm trying my best, and I'll keep going. We'll keep going.